You open your closet and stand there for a moment, not because you're carefully thinking about what to wear, but because nothing immediately feels right, even though it's full, more than full, with clothes you haven't touched in months, some still with tags on them, others you don't even remember buying. And yet none of it seems to match the version of you that has to walk out the door today. So you pull something out, hold it for a second, and then put it back. Not quite sure what you were expecting to find in the first place, only aware that somehow, even with all of this, it still feels like you have nothing to wear. So you close the door and reach for your phone. Not really looking for anything specific, just moving through things until something catches your attention. Something small, something that feels like it might shift whatever this feeling is, even slightly. And after a few seconds, it does. Not in a dramatic way, but just enough for your focus to move, just enough to give you something to respond to, something you can act on instead of sitting in that stalled moment. You choose something, not because it matters that much, but because choosing itself feels like movement. And in that moment, movement feels better than staying where you are. So you click, and for a brief stretch of time, that's enough. Not because anything has really changed, but because it no longer feels completely stuck. But when it arrives, the feeling doesn't come with it. And as you open the package and look at what's inside, there's a small pause where you expect something to land, something to feel different, but it doesn't quite happen. So you set it aside, and without really deciding to, it blends into everything else that's already there, becoming part of the same space that felt off to begin with. From the outside, it looks simple, just too many things, maybe a lack of control. And that's usually where the explanation ends. But if you start tracing these moments back, not by what you bought, but by when, a different pattern begins to show up. Because these decisions don't happen randomly. They tend to appear on certain kinds of days, the ones that feel harder to sit through, where your thoughts don't settle, and everything feels slightly off without a clear reason. And in those moments, bringing something new into your space does something real. It interrupts the feeling, even if only briefly, giving you something that shifts when you act, something that responds, something that makes it feel like you're not completely stuck inside whatever that moment is. So maybe this isn't just about having too much. Maybe those things weren't added without reason. Maybe they showed up at the exact moments you needed something to change, even slightly. And if that's true, then what looks like careless accumulation might be something else entirely. Not a failure of discipline, but a way of dealing with something you didn't know how to carry. At some point, you decide to clear a little space, not everything, just a drawer or maybe a corner of the room that feels slightly heavier than the rest. And when you pick something up and look at it, it seems obvious at first you don't use it. You don't need it. It doesn't really fit into your life the way it used to, so there's no real reason to keep it. But then, without quite knowing why, you hesitate. And it's not really about the object itself, it's about what it's tied to, because somewhere in that moment, you realize it belongs to a version of you that once made sense, a version that had a plan for it, or a reason to own it, or a life where this thing fit in without question. And letting it go doesn't feel like clearing space. It feels like closing something that never fully finished. So instead of getting rid of it, you put it back, not as a clear decision, not something you would explain if someone asked, but in a quieter way, almost automatic, just returning it to where it was or somewhere close, still within reach, still part of the space. And this doesn't just happen once, it shows up in other places too. In clothes you bought for a version of your life you thought you would grow into, in objects tied to routines you imagined yourself maintaining, in things that made sense for a future that felt close at the time but never fully arrived. Over time, your space starts to fill with these things, not randomly, but in a way that reflects all the versions of yourself you haven't completely let go of. Some from the past, some from a future that never quite became real, all of them still present in small, quiet ways. And the difficulty isn't really about deciding what to keep or what to throw away. It's about recognizing what each of those things represents, because letting go of them doesn't just remove the object. It means accepting that version of you isn't coming back, or maybe was never going to arrive in the first place. So instead, you hold on to them, not because they serve you now, but because they keep those versions from disappearing completely and slowly without really noticing when it happened the space around you starts to change. Not just a place you live in, but something that holds everything you haven't resolved yet. Something closer to and something that keeps more than it uses. There are moments when the usual logic doesn't really apply, not in an obvious way, but in a shift you can feel without being able to explain it. Where things that normally feel manageable start to feel heavier than they should. And even though nothing around you has really changed, something about being inside your own head takes more effort than expected. So you sit there a little longer than you meant to, thinking you'll get up soon, but not quite doing it. After a while, doing nothing stops feeling neutral. It doesn't feel like rest anymore. It feels like being stuck in something that doesn't move, something that keeps pressing without giving you a clear way out. And eventually, the problem isn't even what you're dealing with, but the fact that nothing is changing. So you reach for something that does, not because it solves anything, but because it creates a shift, something small but real, where you open your phone, scroll without really thinking about what you're looking for, pause on something, and choose it. Not because it matters that much, but because choosing itself feels like movement. And in that moment, movement feels better than staying where you are. And for a brief moment, that's enough. From the outside, it doesn't look like much, just another purchase, something unnecessary, something easy to regret later. But in that specific moment, it wasn't about the thing at all. It was about the interruption, the slight change in direction, the proof, however small, that something could still respond when you reached for it. Sometimes that's all there is, not a solution, not progress, just enough movement to get through the next hour without feeling completely pinned in place, because doing nothing felt worse than doing something that didn't really matter. So when you look back at those decisions later, it's easy to collapse them into a single idea: waste, impulse, lack of control. But if you isolate the moment they came from, they don't look like that anymore. They look like something else. Not an attempt to get more, but an attempt to stay steady. Not a failure to manage yourself, but a way of keeping yourself from sinking further than you already were. After a while, it stops feeling like a few isolated moments and begins to look more like a pattern. Not so much in what you buy, but in how things slowly gather around you, almost without drawing attention to themselves at first, until one day you start noticing the duplicates, the extra one you picked up just in case. And then another because it was on sale. Things that serve the same purpose, sitting in different places, none of them fully used, but none of them easy to let go of either. So they stay. There are also the things that were meant to be temporary. Small solutions you told yourself would only last for a while, but somehow they never left. And over time, they stopped feeling temporary at all, even if they were never quite what you actually wanted, just close enough that you stopped questioning them, even as they quietly shaped the space around you. And then there are the things connected to a version of your life that hasn't happened. Clothes for routines you don't follow, objects for habits you thought you would build, tools for a version of yourself that always seems just slightly ahead but never fully arrives. And even though you can see that now, it doesn't make them easier to let go of. None of this feels significant on its own, but together it creates something else, not just clutter, but a kind of weight, a space filled with decisions you've postponed, versions of yourself you haven't quite released, and possibilities you don't fully believe in anymore, but aren't ready to give up either. What looks like preparation starts to feel different when you step back. Because it isn't really about being ready, it's about not trusting that you'll be able to handle things when they actually happen. So you compensate in small ways, keeping more than you need, settling for versions of things that don't fully satisfy you, holding onto options not because they serve you now, but because letting them go feels like removing something you might need later. So you keep those too. And over time, the space around you begins to reflect that, not in an obvious way, but in how everything feels slightly dense, slightly overlapping, slightly unresolved, until it becomes harder to tell whether you're managing your things or your things are quietly shaping how you move, what you choose, and what you keep putting off. Because at that point, it's no longer just about what you have, but about what all of it is holding in place. At some point, the question begins to change, not in a dramatic way, but quietly, as you stop focusing on what you should get rid of or how to organize what you have, and start noticing what all of this has actually been doing for you. Because when you look at it that way, none of it feels entirely random anymore. The things you kept, the things you bought, even the ones you regret, they all seem to trace back to specific moments, to something you were experiencing at the time, something that needed a response, even if the response didn't make sense later, even if it only worked for a little while. So what you're left with isn't just a collection of things. It's something closer to a record, not of what you own, but of where you've been, of what you were trying to hold together, of what you weren't ready to let go of what you needed, even if you didn't fully understand it at the time. And when you begin to see it that way, something shifts, not because anything disappears, but because the weight starts to change shape, and your attention moves away from the objects themselves and back toward the person who was moving through all of it, moment by moment, without always having a clear way forward. Because in the end, what you actually carry isn't everything you've accumulated. Most of it stays where you left it, sitting in the same place, unchanged, while something else continues moving. What you carry is time, specific moments, the ones where something felt off and you reached for something to shift it. The ones where you held on, even when you didn't fully know why. The ones that passed whether you were ready for them or not, leaving behind traces that only make sense when you look back. And all of this, the things, the purchases, the space around you, they only matter in relation to those moments, not as proof of who you are, but as quiet evidence of how you moved through them. So the question isn't really about how much you have or how well you've managed it. It's whether you can see those moments for what they were without immediately turning them into something to fix or something to regret. Because once you can, the role of everything around you begins to change. Not something you need to hold on to, not something you need to clear away, but something that no longer has to carry meaning on your behalf. And in that shift, there's a different kind of space. Not empty, not minimal, but open enough that you're no longer moving around what you've accumulated, just moving as things come and go without needing to keep anything beyond the moment it was lived.